Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to talk about the Nameless Seer scrying maps, when and why you should do it, and what the best donor and recipient maps are. But if you don't know what scrying is, or what a donor or recipient map is, that's fine, we'll explain that as well. Sometimes, when you're running a tier 16 Atlas map, or some higher tier maps that are off the Atlas, so that includes both tier 17 maps and also tier 16 special maps like the Shaper Guardians, when you're doing those, you can sometimes encounter the Nameless Seer. For this purpose, you need to find the Nameless Seer inside a tier 16 Atlas map. So here I'm in Ashenwood, that's one of the normal Atlas maps, this one would count, but if this was a Forge of the Phoenix and I got the Nameless Seer there, that wouldn't help, and if it was a tier 17 Citadel map, it also wouldn't help me. When you talk to the Nameless Seer, you'll be presented with two options inside tier 16 Atlas maps, and only one option if you're in a tier 17 or an off-Atlas tier 16. The first thing is the option to purchase an item. You can do this independently, it doesn't mess up the scrying a map. He will provide you with a list of unique items, and I gotta say, I have got absolute rubbish here, and you can have a look through them and choose one of them to keep. The rest of them you'll be unable to get. So I believe Grip of the Council turns into the most thaumaturgic dust out of any of these options, and I'm certainly not going to equip any of these, so for that reason I'm going to take it. If it turns out I'm wrong, then Tripping On might have been better, but that's okay. I will take Grip of the Council. The reason we're here though is to talk about the scrying a map option. You can see I've got a few scries already set up on the Atlas. Now with scrying a map, you can have a donor map and a recipient map. The donor map is the one that you must find the Nameless Seer inside. And we'll get to how you find the Nameless Seer in a sec. It's an RNG event, but you can make it more in your favour by killing pretty much everything inside the map. Now if you're a PC player, you can hover over a map on the Atlas and hold Alt, and you can have a look at the list of divination cards that are available to loot inside that map. You can see here that I've got the Fletcher, the Mercenary, Bowyer's Dream, and Burning Blood. Of these, two of these have basically no value in Trade League, the Fletcher and the Mercenary. The Bowyer's Dream and Burning Blood have a little bit of value, but I happen to know they're very, very rare cards for what they award. For that reason, I'm not interested in the Divination card set that's found inside Ashenwood. However, let's just assume that this had better Divination cards. Maybe it had middle tier Divination cards, such as Infested Valley with the Offspring and the Bitter Blossom, which is reasonably good, and also the Mind's Eyes, which you're never sad about seeing. Or maybe it has outstanding Divination cards like Defiled Cathedral, which has the Apothecary. In that case, I'd be much more excited about finding the Nameless Seer inside this map. Then I can pick a map that I enjoy running, that I like the tileset of, or that for various other reasons is a good recipient map, and I can imprint the Divination cards from the map that I'm in onto another map that I would prefer to run. So with Ashenwood, I'm not actually interested in using this as a donor map. However, for the purposes of demonstration, I will anyway. I'm going to say that the Ashenwood Divination cards can overwrite the Divination cards that are found inside Haunted Mansion. So, I'm going to select to scry from Ashenwood onto Haunted Mansion. This will then establish a new scry. You'll get a confirmation window just to make sure you're happy with that. And then you'll see this show up on your Atlas. Note that you can have multiple different scries simultaneously, but, and this one's important, you can't have any of the endpoints of one scry be an endpoint of another. So for instance, I would not be able to scry from Ashenwood onto Glacier, nor would I be able to scry from Glacier onto Ashenwood. And that's because I already have Defiled Cathedral scrying onto Glacier. Okay, so you can see here the donor map is the one that you find the Nameless Seer in, and its set of Divination cards get imprinted onto another map, and that map becomes the recipient map. What are the best donor maps? The answer here is it is the maps that have the best Divination cards in the game. Not just the best ones from a value perspective, but you also need to factor in how rare the Divination card is. Now, if you're playing in Trade League, there are two clear best choices. Unfortunately, both of these best choices are staggeringly rare Divination cards. These ones are Defiled Cathedral for the Apothecary, and Residence Map for the Fire of Unknown Origin. Both of these Divination cards are staggeringly rare. Both of them require fairly high level recipient maps, but do keep in mind that that takes into account the Voidstone status of the map that you put into. For instance, if I had had a scry setup where Residence was the donor map, and the recipient map was the very low tier Strand map, which by default is tier 3, then in that situation, a tier 16 Strand will still meet the criteria for both Fire of Unknown Origin and the Dapper Prodigy, which require map tiers to be 13 or higher. But a 1 or 0 Voidstone version of Strand, or even a 2 Voidstone version, is not going to get there. It depends upon the tier of the map that you put into the map device. So the number one choice once you factor in Rarity is the Apothecary. The number two choice is Fire of Unknown Origin. The number three choice is a multi-way tie, and it is all of the Divination cards that award a Divine Orb. This could be, for instance, Mesa Map or Dry Sea Map, which award the Fortunate. There's not much difference between these, they're all about equal to each other. In fourth position we have Strand Map, and that's because of the Divination card I See Brothers. There is good reason to believe that this Divination card is about 1.5% the drop rate of that of the Fortunate. If you're interested in where that number comes from, I'll put a link to a video in the last 20 seconds of this video on the bottom left of your screen that outlines how we came to conclusions about the drop rates of various Divination cards in the game. But suffice to say that I think there's fairly compelling evidence that I See Brothers is 1.5% as common as the Fortunate, and given its current value, that ends up making it one of the better Divination cards to farm. But again, you are chasing jackpots here, whereas with something like the Fortunate, you're going to be constantly getting it. Not necessarily in every map, but frequently enough that every single play session you'll get 2 or 3 at least, and potentially very many more. Position 5 is Divination cards that award Pieces of Mirrors. Now, there is a widely circulating list that uses 3.24 estimates for Unrequited Love's rarity, based upon various stack deck data that was pulled out last league. I believe that those were just based on someone who had a real hot streak getting this card, and I believe this card is a lot rarer than that list would have you indicate. In fact, I believe its drop weight is 4, which is considerably lower than that of the Apothecary. So, I'm not going to recommend farming the Unrequited Love, but it is an option, and it's going to be in the 5th category. However, the standout of all of the cards that awards Mirror Shards is 7 Years Bad Luck in Moon Temple, because with this you also have the bonus of having the Progeny of Lunaris. This Divination card is not common, and it's worth a couple of divines if you get it, but it's something that is an added bonus that is meaningful and ends up pushing Moon Temple ahead of all of the other maps that award a Mirror Shard card, whether that card be Unrequited Love or whether it be 7 Years Bad Luck. The Innocent is also a nice little bonus. It's something you're always going to pick up, and it's something that's going to drop a considerable amount as well. Okay, so that's the best donor maps in the game as I see it. Any of those is a reasonably good choice, and as you can see, with Glacier being my favourite Recipient map this league, that's meant that the Defiled Cathedral Scry that I've got here is the best one that's possible. However, I certainly wouldn't fault the decision to go with something a lot more common like the Fortunate. Even if the expected value is a little bit lower, you're not as reliant upon those jackpot hits as you are with the Apothecary. The number of Apothecaries I have dropped this league is exactly equal to 0. In terms of the Recipient map, the one that you want to imprint onto, that's going to depend very heavily upon your Atlas strategies. There are certain Atlas strategies, and I want to particularly talk up ones that involve Eater of Worlds altars, that strongly reward Jungle Valley map or Mausoleum map. And of those two, Jungle Valley is the superior choice. As runner-ups in this category, you have Mesa Map and you have Foundry Map as well. The key thing you need to know about Eldritch altars is that there are 3 different things they can have as rewards. They can have mods that affect the player, which affect the general rarity and quantity or potentially duplication chances for items found within the whole map. Or there are ones that affect the map boss. These tend to be the weakest, and there are ones that affect Eldritch minions. 2 of these pools are going to be chosen at random, but the map boss affecting ones are disqualified if the map boss is not present in the map at the time. Normally this means the map boss has already been slain. For example, in Mesa Map and Foundry Map, and the reason that those maps are considered the 3rd and 4th best choices for this strategy, you can very quickly go to the map boss, kill the map boss, whilst killing very few monsters on the way, and then after that, everything else is not going to have map boss options as a valid choice, and so it's going to choose one player affecting altar mod and one Eldritch minion affecting altar mod. However, the thing that's really different here is what happens on Jungle Valley and Mausoleum. On these maps, the map boss doesn't spawn until you spend a certain amount of time in its room. For that reason, from the very beginning of the map, all the altar mods that can spawn are locked in as being one half of it is something that affects the player, the other half is something that affects Eldritch minions. You can go out of your way to change that by going and spawning the boss, then logging out and coming back in. But in practice that's not going to happen, and so that means that these are the best maps for the purposes of Eldritch altar scaling. Another factor you want to seriously consider is what tier 17 maps drop inside the map that you're considering running. The 5 tier 17 maps are not of equal value if you're playing in Trade League, and if you're playing in solo self-found, it'll also matter to you quite a bit as well. The first thing to notice is that Citadel map is the least desirable of the lot. Arguably, it has the hardest boss of all of the different tier 17 map bosses. Some people might dispute that. Those people are mostly playing tricksters with one step ahead, or they're playing juggernauts, and as a result, they're unaffected by some of the nasty action speed debuffs that are found in this fight. But Citadel map boss is really mean, just as something that has a lot of mandatory dodging and at the same time is attacking your action speed pretty intensively. It also biases your Uber boss fragments towards the Shaper, the Uber Elder, and the Cortex, all of which are of pretty minimal value compared to the rest. The second map that is of lower value than the rest is Abomination map. It's not that the boss drops are bad here, they're among the better of them, but there's a couple of things that make Abomination less desirable. Firstly, there's a lot of Detonate Dead monsters in the map itself, and that ends up meaning that outside the boss arena, it's the rippiest of the tier 17 maps. On top of that, the map boss itself can be pretty difficult. It's actually probably the easiest if you're playing a gladiator that has a large amount of recovery on block, but for most builds, it's the hardest one to defeat. So those are the two that are in the lowest demand. Fortress is higher demand because it is by far the easiest of the tier 17s to complete. It doesn't have as many super lethal trash monsters throughout it, and additionally, it has the boss that is probably mechanically the easiest to defeat of them all. It's one of the less forgiving. The Nightmare of the Unbreakable definitely hits really hard if it connects, but it's entirely possible to dodge everything this boss does, and it's a bit easier than it is with the others. Sanctuary and Ziggurat map have middling difficulty bosses and middling tier drops, where Fortress actually has pretty bad Uber boss drops. Sanctuary and Ziggurat manage to have pretty good drops, and also they're just not as mean as Abomination can be and Citadel almost always is. So that's another factor you should decide upon when you're thinking exactly what you want to scry onto. So that's the first consideration that you might have. The second consideration is if you're running any sort of strategy that wants to have additional unique monsters on the map, then Glacier is the clear best choice, with City Square a distant second. There's a number of things that you can use with this. There's various Titanic Scarabs, there's a whole bunch of other things, but basically Glacier is something that you want to consider and probably the best option if that's what you're doing. And finally, we have just simply clean, easy to navigate layouts. Strand is probably the poster child here, but it's not the only option. You also have Atoll map, you have Beach map, and a few others that are just really clean, simple, straightforward layouts. And these are at their best if you're looking to run a strategy that rewards exploring the map quickly, and then in that case, you'll find that these are going to be your best choices. The final thing that might inspire you to use a particular map as a recipient map is maybe you just really like a particular layout that's a little bit off meta, or you really like the tile set, just the appearance of that map, and in that case, you're free to choose that map, of course. Okay, so that's been looking mostly at this from a trade league perspective. What if you're playing in solo self-found? In that case, what I suggest that you do is you consider divination cards that you might consider desirable to have. For example, you might consider it desirable to own a Beric's Respite. And then what you want to do is go to Faustus and check how much the gold cost would be to trade for that off another player. Of course, if you're playing in solo self-found, no one else can fill that order, but the reason you want to do this is to get a sense as to whether or not it is plausible to self-compile a full set of this divination card. Cards that cost more than 400 but less than 600 gold to trade, these are going to be a considerable ordeal to get even a single copy of, but it's not something that's going to feel unreasonable. Anything that's in the 600 to 800 range, that's going to take longer again. 800 to 1000, that's going to take longer again. And it's worth noting that this is not a linear scaling factor, it's a cubic scaling factor. So every time that the gold cost goes up by a factor of 2, the amount of effort that's involved in farming even one copy of that card goes up by a factor of 8. So keep that in mind, it is definitely going to get out of control quickly, especially with divination cards like the Apothecary that cost more than 1000 gold to trade. These things are rare indeed. Okay, so that returns us to the question of how did I find the Nameless Seer in the first place? And the answer is that the Nameless Seer appears to spawn much more frequently when you either make a mob type extinct in a map or you come very close to it. I'm not 100% certain on the exact conditions that cause the Seer to spawn. No one really is outside grinding your games. You'll see that I'm near the site where I found a Seer earlier, although that Seer has disappeared since I've done all of the things I can do with it. Now you'll see that I've got 22 monsters remaining on this map. When I actually killed the last monster to get this Seer to spawn, I think there were between 50 and 70 monsters left. So it still said 50 plus monsters remain, but it was very close to ticking down under 50. And then I killed the rest of the pack that was with it, and killed everything for a couple of screens so that I could safely record this video, and at that point there were only 22 monsters that remained. So that's the one thing that's known about the Nameless Seer. There is different information going around as to whether or not juicing your maps helps you find the Seer or not. It has been my personal experience, and many will dispute this, but it has been my personal experience that the best way to find the Nameless Seer is to elk and go, prepare 20 maps at a time, blast them out, and you'll probably find the Seer once during that 20 maps, and if you can do those maps in under 2 minutes each, then that means it's only going to take you an hour or less to find the Seer unless you get very unlucky. Other people, on the other hand, have said that they find the Seer meaningfully more when they're using a large amount of extra mechanics to juice the map. They could be right. Whatever the case, full clearing maps will find you the Seer in a reasonable amount of time. Anyways, that is a summary of the Nameless Seer scrying maps, why you should scry, and if you should scry, how you should scry. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results.